Welcome to the Dan Norton Show. Today, I am here with, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Daniel Ortner. I'm an attorney at a public interest lawyer at doing conservative libertarian work, and also a believer and a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Yeah, I don't know what else. Sorry, that was a
That's
choppy
fine.
introduction.
That's right. So we're kind of winging it here. Okay, so I recently got in touch with you through Facebook.
Mhm.
I had been posting on various sites asking if people were interested in having discussions about or debates about various topics, and you responded to one of those and said you were interested in having a discussion. So
Yeah.
that's what led to this. So in particular, you had told me that you were an atheist. So
Mhm.
I guess one of the posts that I put up was anyone interested in discussing atheism or whether the issue of whether God exists, feel free to get in touch. And I don't know if that's one of the ones you were responding
Yeah.
to, but anyways, you told me that you had been an atheist and you had then transitioned to being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah. That's right.
And I thought that might be interesting to talk about. So
Sure. Yeah.
why don't you just tell us about that transition and
Yeah.
what led to it?
So I had a interesting, I guess I'd say, faith journey throughout my life. I mean, my parents, I was raised in a Jewish household, but a rather secular Jewish household. My mom was a believer in God. She was had a strong personal faith, but wasn't very very active in practicing. But we had a lot of the Jewish holidays and traditions in my home, but she wasn't very wasn't observant. Didn't keep Sabbath every weekend, for instance, or keep kosher in the house or things like that. But she was very a believer in God. My dad was, I would say, depending on when I talked to him, he was either an atheist or an agnostic, depending on the day and the mood and his feelings about the world. He was very jaded about God because of a lot of my ancestors died in the Holocaust, and that really uh, turned him away from any belief in God, and especially in a loving God. He really just didn't see how that was possible, that there could be a God, a loving God that allowed people to suffer. So I grew up with that background. I was very involved in faith in Jewish activities in high school. I was also had a lot of friends that were Christian, and so they were trying to talk to me about their faith, and so I was also very curious about their traditions as well. But when I was in high school, my mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and she died when I was 18, when I was just finishing high school from cancer, and that event really shattered my faith in God. I became a very strong, ardent atheist for a couple of years. I was involved with I went to Brandeis University for my undergraduate, and I was a member of their Humanist Society. I would try to start debates with faithful people that I knew at the university, and really are arguing with them about the nature of God. And so that was for a couple of years. I was very intensely atheist, and would argue with people about how there cannot be a God, and it doesn't make sense that there's a God. And I had a personal conversion towards God. I think it was a lot of things that influenced me. One was that I've always had questions, even when I was an atheist, when I was growing up, about the purpose of life, why we're here, where we come from, where we're going. Those kind of deeper questions have always really gnawed at me. And I felt a tugging, a pull to keep learning about faith, to explore more, even when I felt that at the time I was definitely an atheist. Something in me was pulling me to want to learn more about faith. At the same time, one of my best friends in undergrad, she was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but she was also not active in the church at the time. She wasn't involved with it at all, really, for the first couple of years that I knew her in college. But I'd heard a little bit about it from her, and she started getting involved with our faith again. And right at this time when I was interested in looking into religion, again. And so I made the decision kind of out of the blue a little bit to look into her faith a little bit and to try to attend to see what it was like. So at first I went to a bookstore and I went to Barnes and Noble at the time, and I got a book, Mormonism for Dummies, a idiot's guide, a complete idiot's guide, and started looking into those books, and had a really unusual experience of feeling like the things I was reading about just resonated somewhere deep within me. Like what I was reading was something I'd never heard before. The doctrines about where we come from, what Latter-day Saints call the plan of salvation, these ideas of like the purpose of life. But I felt something within me really just stir and resonate with it in a way that was really unexpected. That made me feel like even though I'd never heard it before, something I'd always deep down known inside. And that really pushed me to want to learn more. So I began to go to her church with her, and I began to I met with missionaries, and I began to pray about whether the things I was being taught were true. And I had a couple of friends who were really against this process. They were very skeptical. They especially didn't like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They thought it was closed-minded and bigoted, and they didn't like the organization. So they would begin talking to me about all the reasons I shouldn't be looking into it or shouldn't be interested in it. And so one evening I was talking to a friend who was really going heavy into criticizing the church, and I felt this feeling that I needed to go in Boston. I was going to school in Boston at the time. There's the church. We have a temple near Boston, the church, and I'd never been there before. It's not where they have usual Sunday meetings. It's a building that's only for special ceremonies, like marriages are done at temples, for instance. But so I felt like I should go there. I'd never been there before, but it was like 9 o'clock at night on a Friday night. But I felt really strongly that I needed to drive there, so I got in my car, drove there. And when I got there, I had a really life-changing spiritual experience where I felt God's presence so powerfully in my life. I knew that he loved me and was there. I knew that he cared about me, and I saw who he wanted me to be, who I could become if I followed him. I saw the way he saw me, the potential that he saw in me, and that experience really changed me. I was a skeptic up until that moment, and even after that, right afterwards I drove to some other nearby churches to kind of test it out for myself to see if I'd have the same reaction to other organizations or other religious practices, and the experience was different. It was not the same at all. I went back afterwards and prayed again, and felt really transformed into a different person in some respects, and that experience really changed my life. Since then I've had a lot of ups and downs. I've had a lot of experiences. I've had a lot of challenges in opposition from family and friends and others to my faith path, my journey. But that experience really gave me a foundational conviction that hasn't changed. That was now 11 years ago. I was in 2008, so 12 years ago, or 10 and a half, or 11 and a half years ago. And it really changed my life since then. That feeling, that conviction has not left me, and it's really changed everything else in my life. It led me I served a mission for my church for 2 years as a missionary in Russia. After that, the year after that, it really changed my life, and that feeling of certainty and conviction from God has not really left me since that time. So that kind of certitude that I felt from what felt to me like from the source, from God himself, was something that has really changed my life forever, I'd say. So
Okay.
enough. Yeah.
Thanks for telling us all that. So let me just see if I got the overall arc of your story. So you started out growing up in a Jewish, or at least culturally Jewish, household, and then
I went to like a Jewish day school. We were very involved with Judaism, but my dad was kind of atheist, and my mom was culturally Jewish very strongly, but not very orthodox in her practice, at least.
Okay. And then you had this experience where your mother passed away when you were in high school or around that time, and that shattered your belief in God, or at least made you question it. And then it was that. So that's what led you to the period of atheism.
Yeah.
and then when you were in college early on, you met this person who was a Mormon, and then you had certain questions or philosophical issues you were interested in, and that you started to explore religion again.
Yeah. So I actually really part of what led to me, I spent the summer while I was in college, one of the summers doing a study abroad program in China. It was a public health summer study abroad program that I did in the southwest of China in Yunnan province in China. And while I was there, I spoke to a lot of people who were of Eastern faiths, and also my instructor there was a Christian, a non-denominational Christian, and we had very long, very detailed conversations about God and the purpose of life. And that summer really sparked in me a desire again to just begin learning more, begin exploring, see where that led me to. I didn't really have an idea of where it would lead me at the time, but I felt a need to reconnect or to find something deeper than myself. And so that led me to begin looking into different faiths, and ultimately my friend who was a member of the church that I joined influenced me into looking into that faith. But it was really a deeper desire to explore and to feel like I needed some higher connection or higher purpose in my life that I was lacking in some way.
Okay. I guess I'm interested in maybe understanding a little better maybe two things. First, the reasons for rejecting religion, and then second, the reasons for going back to religion. And you've said some things about that, but I'm wondering if maybe we can dig into that a little more.
So I felt like, leaving faith, I think I viewed it as kind of three legs of a stool almost, of like why I felt like I didn't believe in a God. And it was, first of all, scientifically, it didn't seem to make sense to me that there was a God. Learning about evolution, learning about the nature of the world, it seemed more logical to me at the time that there was no higher purpose or higher creator. The second piece was a feeling that religion had generally been a force for bad in the world rather than good in the world. So a sense that people don't really need religion to be able to be good people, and that religion had done bad in some respects. And the third was, I guess, a more personal feeling of if there is a God, it doesn't feel like he's really the kind of loving, caring creator that Christianity or Judaism talk about. That at best he's kind of indifferent, and at worst actively harming people. So that was kind of the three things that I really latched onto. I think was, I guess, scientifically it seemed like less likely that there was a God, and it seemed like the faith in God wasn't really a force for good in the world, and it seemed hard to believe in a loving God to me. I think those were maybe the things that really pushed me away from faith. Together with, in general sense that people didn't really need God. People could still be good, which I do think is true. People can be good people without belief in God. So I had a really sense that I didn't need this belief, and it wasn't good, and it wasn't accurate. So that was those are the factors I think that pushed me away. I generally pushing me coming back to God, I think it was a little different. It was more experiential. Like I mentioned, this feeling of connecting to God. I have come to realize, and this is my feeling is that if there is a God, he loves every person in the world, every soul, every person born in this world is, my belief is he's a child or daughter. Every soul is a child or daughter of a loving parent. And so if that's true, how would God want to communicate with us? He would want to speak to each of us personally in our own language that we understand. And that language is not going to be this, not everyone is college educated in the world. Not everyone has a degree. Not everyone is a lawyer. Not everyone is a linguist. Not everyone can read scriptures the same way in the same original language. Not everyone has the same understanding, but there is a universal language. That's what I've come to personally understand, which is that communication through God, through prayer, through the Spirit, where he directly wants to communicate to each of us. That's kind of a universal language that cuts across barriers. And that experience is really what led me to my belief. It's not, I've always thought that the intellectual case for God, there are arguments against his existence, there are arguments for his existence. There are reasons to believe that the world is unlikely to have come about through evolution and chance. There are reasons to accept evolution and chance as the source of the world. But that the tiebreaker is our own experiences and how God speaks to us individually. And so that was really the force for me, was this personal experience that I felt that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before, that was different from my own internal thinking and reasoning, but was coming to me from something higher than myself. That was really what pushed me to re-embrace and believe in God again, that personal conviction and experience that I had.
Okay, so it's interesting that there's kind of there's a difference between the reasons that led you to abandon God,
Yeah.
and then the reasons that led you to come back. They're different, it seems. It's not like so you said you had this three-legged stool, and there were scientific reasons for disbelieving in God, and I guess to just to take that one leg, it's not like when you went back to God, it's not like you thought, oh, the scientific reasons are no longer there. It's that you had different grounds entirely. So you might still hold, well, I don't know. I mean, do you still think that there are scientific grounds against God, and it's just that the experience overpowers that, or do you no longer think there are scientific grounds? So I'm wondering, like, how those are those three legs of the stool still in place and pulling you in the other direction, and it's just that the experience is a stronger pull, or what?
I don't think, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I would say that with regard to the science and his evolution and other topics of that sort, that it's just a misunderstanding of people understanding God. God doesn't work outside of the laws of nature. God is works through the world. He creates the world through natural processes. The way that we as Latter-day Saints view God is he is an organizer of matter. He created the world out of what existed. He built it. He organized it through natural forces. And so I see science and God as being ultimately compatible. And there are things that religion has traditionally thought that conflicts with science, but ultimately science, I mean, one, it could be that we don't have a full understanding of science. There's still always an indeterminacy in science, but to the extent that it conflicts with the traditional understanding of some belief, God works through science, and science is a way that we can better understand the creator of the universe ultimately. So I just don't, I see the conflict differently than I used to. I think I had a very traditional view of God as, I mean, the traditional Christian view or Judeo-Christian view is created the world out of nothing, operates outside the laws of nature in some way. Everything is miraculous. And I don't see God that way anymore. I see him as working within the laws of nature to create the world. And create and send us here to this world as part of his design. But so I think that change helped me be less troubled with scientific issues that that are potentially challenging. I see them as something that can either will be reconciled, or either has been reconciled, will be reconciled, or ultimately that that we need to understand better the laws of the world to better understand God, how he works ultimately.
Okay, so there's, I guess there can't be a conflict, or I guess you don't see any contradiction right now, at least, between believing in God and then believing in a scientific view of the world. You think those are compatible?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, that there's more to the world that we don't understand yet. Thinking about knowledge about subatomic particles, how recent a development it is to really understand and be learning more and more about subatomic particles and quarks and neutrinos, whatever other subatomic particles we learn about. I think that my view is that everything is material. The spirit, the soul, that is a material thing. It's just something we don't yet understand. Can't quantify yet. We can't measure. It's something that is, currently not within our comprehension of scientific measurement, but it ultimately is a scientific thing. It is material. There is no, no immateriality. There's nothing that doesn't exist in the physical universe. Ultimately, God is working through matter and through science ultimately. But he understands the laws better than we do. Thinking if today we went back and showed people 200 years ago some of the things we developed, the atom bomb, nuclear technology, the internet, they would think it's magical and unscientific. Just like we think that when God works through some higher rules or laws that we don't yet understand of the world. But nothing is unscientific, nothing is immaterial. It's all just using maybe a higher level of comprehension that we have currently, but it's all based on the same rules, the same order that we understand, is the way I view it.
Okay. It's interesting that you think everything, even the soul, is material. I think many Christians would say it's immaterial, but maybe you have a different view on that.
Yeah, I mean, Latter-day Saints, the Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints has some big differences from other Christians, and a couple of things that I think to me make a big difference in how I understand some of the things I struggled with. I mean, the big thing I struggled with growing up was the question of theodicy, like why does God allow bad things to happen? Why and ultimately, what is God's purpose for us? If He's a creator, what does He want us? What's the reason that He sent us to this world? Why are we here at all? And Latter-day Saints have a very different answer or understanding of that. It's that God, like I said, He's our Father. He's a parent figure, but His purpose is to help us become like Him ultimately. Like to really, each of us has the kind of a spark of divine in us to become ultimately like God in every way. There's no ontological gap between us and God in our theology. It's God is a perfected version of us that we can become like Him ultimately, and so that's a really big conceptual difference, I think, and it leads, it also results in a sense that everything is material because God is tangible, we are tangible. Like it's just different types of substance or matter, but it's all ultimately physical, and it's perfected. The purpose is to help us become perfected, help us become our best selves, our ultimately like Him, and like our Savior Jesus Christ, that they have already set the path for us to follow. And that idea to me was really empowering, and really changed my perspective on these kind of questions I had. Why is there suffering? It's just a different understanding of the world, that God is not in charge of. He doesn't direct everything to happen. Instead, He creates the world, places us here, gives us agency, freedom to act, and it really just changed a lot of my understanding of these kind of questions I always had. It really reconciled them in some ways that gave me a lot of comfort and a lot of direction.
Okay, just one thing before I want to ask about go back to the issue of science in a minute, but just one clarification of your view. On your view, is God Himself a material thing?
Yeah.
Okay, so everything, the soul and God, everything is material. And would you say there's nothing that's non-material?
Yeah, I think everything ultimately is material. I mean, it might be finer, like materials we don't yet understand. We don't know how they work. We can't measure them. We can't observe them yet. But it's all ultimately material.
Okay. So maybe you could be called a materialist to use that term. Okay, so I want to go back to the issue of science and whether it's compatible with belief in God, at least the kind of God that you believe in. Yeah. So let's take the trait of omnipotence. This is a trait that is often attributed to God. Mm-hmm. He's omnipotent, all-powerful. And what exactly does that mean? Well, does that mean, for instance, that He could make something all red and all green at the same time and in the same respect?
Or so heavy He can't lift it, or these hypotheticals.
So what do you think about that? Like, can God make contradictions
No,
possible?
no. So I think the way I would see omnipotence is God, he's working within the universe that exists. He's not omnipotent maybe in the traditional sense of able to do absolutely anything, because he didn't create the universe out of nothing. It's not, you know, it's a different reality, a different understanding of him in some respects. So he organizes, he shapes, and he works according to rules and of the universe. There's something that what it means to be a god in a way is to be perfectly good, to be perfected in the sense that God is, and that he acts a certain way. But he can't go contrary to that nature of what it means to be a god in some respects. Like his being God means he works within certain constraints. Like the big one is our agency. God cannot compel us or force us to believe. He cannot compel us to act a certain way contrary to our individual will, because to do that would, in some ways, he would stop being God. It would be contrary to his very nature as deity to force or compel another person, another soul, another being to act in a certain way. It's not that maybe whether he theoretically could or couldn't do that is different, is a question I don't have an answer to necessarily, but it's contrary to his nature as God to do so, whether he theoretically could do so or not. He would stop being anything that we would consider God if he would act in a way contrary to that nature. In our church, we have the idea of Satan in opposition to God. Satan's big plan, his goal, his desire was to essentially subvert agency, subvert individual freedom of choice, to say to people, you don't have a choice how to act, or we're taking away any of your freedom to act one way or the other, for good or for evil. So that idea is contrary to what God is about, which is allowing us to exercise our free agency and make choices for ourselves. So that is a major part of his nature, ultimately. That he can't go against that, I would say.
Okay. So setting aside human beings and whether God can interfere with human beings' agency, just take, I'm wondering, so it sounds like on your view, there are some limitations on God's power, or you can confirm that or disconfirm that. Like can he make contradictions like the rock? Can he make a rock? Can he make a rock that's all green and all red, or painted all green and all red at once? You would say no to that.
Presumably no. I never thought about this specifically, the idea of making something contradictory in that way. I mean, it seems like, I don't know how that would work, just practically thinking and believing, thinking things are material, things have some physical rules or reality that are binding them. Maybe, I mean, if there's some principle we don't understand yet that would allow, like some Schrodinger's cat-like principle of things simultaneously existing in two states that we don't yet understand, perhaps there'd be some way for that to be possible. But at least according to my understanding of laws of the universe, that wouldn't be possible.
Okay.
So I wouldn't think that there'd be two contradictory things existing simultaneously. Doesn't fit those rules, at least as far as we understand them. I mean, the opening to the possibility there's something beyond our understanding of the rules of nature, but to the best of my understanding, there would not be possible.
Okay, then that makes me wonder whether it's right to say God is all powerful. So if we want to take that term all powerful in its most literal sense as the power to do anything, then now I don't know if maybe this is a straw man interpretation of what people who say God is all powerful mean by that. So if they don't mean that God can even make contradictions possible,
okay, and some people
but
would
then I
say
want to
yes
get more clear on what they do mean.
Yeah,
so
some people
what are
would
the
say
limitations?
yes. Some people would say yes, that God can do anything. That's what omnipotence means. But my understanding of it, and I think that at least my understanding of my church's view of it, Latter-day Saint tradition view of it, is God is all powerful in the sense that he understands the rules and laws of the universe perfectly. He is able to use them perfectly for his will. but he isn't beyond those rules. He can't go against the nature of reality ultimately. So I think that would be the way I would see omnipotence would be, not that he can do absolutely anything at all whatsoever, but that he's kind of has the perfect understanding of how everything operates in the universe, and can use that in ways that we can't comprehend yet, because our understanding is so much more limited. We are seeing things so in a limited perspective, part of that is, kind of an idea that he's somewhat beyond time. He sees time, the present and the future, at one moment, and operates in a different way with relation to time, which I don't I'm not a theologian. I have not delved into that into the degree that I know some have, but this is understanding that he sees the possibilities and the future in a way that we don't yet, because we are living in a world that's limited in our understanding, where we are not able to see the full results of our actions, the full impact of it, and we don't understand the rules that operate fully. So I see him more as it's a master scientist, a master crafter, someone who fully understands exactly how things operate and can manipulate it in a way that we just can't understand. It's just beyond our present conception of reality.
Okay. So what's coming to mind is another trait that is often attributed to God, which is omniscience. So he's not only all powerful, he's all knowing. And when you say he understands everything, I think of omniscience there more so than omnipotence. But then you also add to that he uses his understanding in ways that are able to manipulate the world, I guess. So I just want to first identify that there's this other trait here, omniscience, and I want to know how exactly does that relate to the trait of omnipotence. So you're saying he uses his omniscience in order to, or at least he can use his omniscience in order to affect the world. But can we go back to the affecting the world part of that? Sure. And I want to get more clear on in what sense is he omnipotent. So let's say that, let's just stipulate for the sake of argument that God is omniscient, assuming that's a meaningful thing to do. He knows everything. Now, let's say he wants to, I don't know, make an elephant pop up right behind me. I mean, does his omnipotence allow him to do something like that, would you say?
Interesting. I mean, I wouldn't discount that it's certainly possible that he could do so. It just seems like the way that he operates is through natural laws and principles. He sets them up and allows them to run and operate themselves, and he does that, I think, but partially because this world is for us to have experiences in a limited, confined reality, confined world, the space that we live in, where he sets us here to have experiences and to live in a world that's bounded in some ways. And so I don't know. I don't know if it would theoretically be possible for him to do that. I don't know that whether it would be or not. I think it probably would be possible, but not through a way that I could understand or explain. And it certainly isn't the way that he usually operates. He operates through the world, establishing the world governed by natural laws and principles. So it seems contrary to the way that he has typically worked within the world.
Okay, but you wouldn't rule it out. Like maybe you said it's possible that he could do such a thing, but maybe we haven't seen it yet. But you allow that it's possible that.
I mean, I don't think there are any rules or anything that we understand right now that would allow spontaneous generation of something like an elephant. The only way that we've ever seen in the world for something like an elephant to come about is through natural process of birth. And so there's nothing that would allow me to think that it is possible, but I am open to the idea that there could be processes that we don't understand in the world, but based on everything we experience in life, there isn't a way for that to happen.
Okay. So how does God, in your view, relate to the laws? So you said he has this, he's omniscient, he understands everything.
Yeah.
Now, these laws that govern the world, if that means things like Newton's laws, the laws of physics, what is God's relation to those laws in your view? Did he create those laws, or do they exist independently of God, and then
Yeah.
he just has knowledge of them, but he can't alter those laws?
Yeah, I would say he doesn't create the laws. Though the world was created, he didn't create things out of nothing. Things existed, and God is an actor on them. He organizes. The principle, I think, is organization out of chaos, taking entropy and creating organization, helping things become more progressed and more advanced ultimately. So he takes matter that's uncreated, unshaped, and forms it into things that we see today, into the world, into us. That something about us, our understanding is it predated the creation of the world. We had existed beforehand, but God shapes us. He helps to take our potential that we have, the kind of untapped potential that we have, and to give it direction and form. He helps create a world where we can come and have a physical experience, get a physical body, and progress in that body and have those experiences. And so it's more of an organization, or he's organizing according to the laws of the universe to help perfect things, to bring things to their most perfect state, to help them from a lower state to a higher state of being.
Okay, so so there's more here that seems to differentiate your view from some other views that I commonly associate with Christianity. So I think Christians will often say God created the world, I guess, out of nothing. There was nothing, and then God created the world, or maybe nothing except God himself, and then God created everything else. But I think what you were just saying is that God didn't do that. He didn't create something out of nothing. He took, I guess, matter that was already existing, and then he just formed it into a more perfect way.
Yeah.
Okay, so he didn't create ex nihilo. He just perfected what was already there. And I guess you think the laws also existed independently of God, and he just uses the laws in order to form things into a more perfect way. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, God is the one who's shaping, who's directing, who's trying to. I mean, understanding, his purpose is to help us become. There's a Joseph Smith, who was the first leader of our church, the prophet. We consider him to be a prophet of God.
Mm-hmm.
He had a revelation, something called the Book of Moses, which is it's a kind of a commentary, an inspired commentary on Genesis. It's additional stories about Moses that we don't have in the Book of Genesis in the Bible. And in there, God says, his work and his glory is to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man. That's ultimately what his purpose is in the world, is to help us to become perfected, to reach our full potential, to have be eternally like him, ultimately, like God is. And that's the purpose of it, is that this goal of taking things that are not perfect and helping them to rise up to their full potential and perfection and perfectibility.
Okay, so one question I have is, are these views that you're describing, namely the view that God did not create the world out of nothing, and he didn't create the laws, but the world and the laws exist independently of God, are these views that basically everyone who's a Mormon holds?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't think most people, members of the church, probably not thought too much about some of the questions we talked about, like who created the laws of nature. It would just not be a question that we would think about maybe in the same way. But I think if you ask, I think anyone would have that view that God is not well. Definitely, it is a church belief that God did not create the world out of nothing, that He organized matter, that He works within some constraints or some rules, some principles that God has to abide by because of His nature, because He is God. To be a God requires a certain nature, a certain character, and a certain way of acting that God has. To be anything that's meaningfully considered God. So I think that's commonly held. I don't know that everyone has thought about some of the questions about where did the rules come from? Did they predate God, or how is God shaped by them? It's not something that people tend to think about very much, but I think it is commonly held belief.
Okay. Well, I'm wondering now, what is the relation of the Mormon Church to, I guess, older Christian denominations?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you, uh, well, first of all, do you take, what is your view of Genesis? I mean, do you take it literally that God created? Well, I mean, according to Genesis, at least on some people's interpretation, God created the various things out of nothing. I think
Yeah.
there was nothing, and then He said, "Let there be such and such."
Yeah.
Uh, and I guess you don't agree with that, at least in a literal way.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, Genesis, I think that, scriptures are written by revelation from God, but imperfect people write them based on their own understanding of the world and their reality. I don't think Genesis was, when it was written, it was meant to be a history, a science textbook about necessarily every aspect of creation of how God made the world. I do generally believe in the Genesis and the Bible is inspired of God, but I think it, and with the question of create, I think that actually, if you go back to Hebrew, bara, the term in Hebrew, doesn't necessarily refer to out of nothing. It could be creating, shaping things into form based on where they, not out of nothing, but out of chaos or unorganized matter. That's what God operated from. So I think that reading of Genesis to me is consistent with what Genesis says. But I don't think Genesis or the Bible is meant to be a scientific textbook of everything that we understand about exactly the mechanism God used for everything in creation. I think what it sets out is a general principle, which is a couple things. One, God is the creator of the world. He is sovereign over the world. He did make the world. Two, that the idea that the pinnacle of creation was the creation of man, that we were put on earth by God's plan to be stewards over the world. The role that Genesis sets out for God, for man in the world, I think is a really important part of the Judeo-Christian kind of understanding of the world. That God is, the purpose of creation is for man to be here. We are kind of central to His plan. It's not, it's not accidental. It's a central part of that role. I think that to me is what Genesis, the most important thing about Genesis is it's not the specific exact mechanisms of how things were created or how much time passed between them. There's no reason we'd take days to mean one day versus 1,000 years versus any indefinite period of time. I think it's not, that's not the purpose of the text. It's like if you take a book that's a fiction book about about something about cars, and you try to apply it as if it's a textbook, a mechanics textbook. That's just not the purpose of the writing of Genesis. But its purpose is to reveal deeper truths about the world in a way that people at the time understood. So I don't worry too much about the question of, is Genesis an exact explanation of the world. I think it sets out the true principles, and it's done in a way that in some ways is figurative, in some ways is not literal, or is not meant to be interpreted literally at all. So, but I do think Genesis is inspired. I do believe there was an Adam and an Eve. I don't know exactly how that fits in with evolution or creation of man. I don't know exactly what existed before them. I don't have a strong thought about that necessarily. I think I'm open to different possibilities, but I do think there was an Adam and an Eve. There was so, the stories described there are generally true, but not necessarily history in the same way that we consider it, actual 100% perfectly accurate, not figurative, but literal, exactly how things happen. I don't think we need to see it that way.
Okay. So let's see, we've got about a little less than 10 minutes.
Yeah, I can keep talking a little bit longer as well if we're. So
okay.
my meeting. I had a meeting at 1, but it was pushed back. So I don't have any meetings till 1:30. So I can talk for as long as I want to.
Okay. Well, just let me know if you need to wrap it up.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what the best direction to go here is. Maybe I should try to press a little more on this idea of lots of things are coming up here, and we can go in all kinds of directions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hit everything for like a short time, or maybe we could drill into more deeply onto one point. And right now, I'm thinking maybe it's better to drill into something and
sure
see where that takes us. So, going back to the omnipotence idea and trying to get clear on exactly what this is. So far we've seen there's certain limitations on the omnipotence, which might lead one to question whether it should be called that.
Sure.
So one limitation is God can't create something out of nothing, at least on your view. God also cannot create the laws; those are independent of God.
I think the thing we were talking about, I mentioned, is also one of the most important things is God can't coerce us to act in a way contrary to our free will. Ultimately, that free, or at least He can't do so in a way that is consistent with the goal of helping us to become perfected. If you coerce something, if you force something to do something against its will, it cannot become like God. Ultimately, God is God because He freely chooses. He is good because of His character and His nature. It is. He has to make us that way. It has to be our free choice. Has to be preserved. He can't destroy that free choice if He wishes to help us become in any way like Him. So that in theory He could force people to act in a way, but He would be destroying the purpose of creation ultimately. Like the purpose being to help us to help perfect His children, the spirits that He cares about. It would be incompatible with that purpose to coerce or to force in a way that would destroy our agency. So it's whether He can or can't do it. It's contrary to the very nature and purpose of God to do so.
Okay, so
yeah, sorry.
You're so there's this traditional objection to or this reconciliation that is often thought to be necessary between God's omniscience, in particular His foreknowledge, what's going to happen in the future, and then human beings' free will. How do you reconcile these? If He knows in advance what we're going to do, are we really free?
Yeah. And I would say, I think we are free to make choices. I think God, He sees, the consequences of our actions in such a way beyond our understanding. It's like He's, if someone is a master chess player. I was watching the Queen's Gambit on Netflix recently, for instance. I don't know if you've seen it, but great show on Netflix. It was about a champion chess player and her story. But if she could see 50 moves ahead of where I could see if I play chess. I can see like 2 moves ahead of me. I'm not a very good chess player. I don't see the consequences of my actions necessarily. So she could see she's playing like 5-dimensional chess. Like she sees exactly what's happening, and every single move, like every permutation in her head, without almost effortlessly. So I think that to me is a metaphor in some ways of God's foreknowledge, is he sees all the potentials, all the actions we could take, and the actions of obviously billions of other people in the world, and what is going to result from it in a way that we just can't see it. And so he is able to use all those things that happen, all those free acts of choice, for his good, for his purpose. Ultimately, he sees how to do that, how to shape what the choices we make into the consequences he wants to see ultimately, without eliminating our agency, without even altering it, without forcing us to do something differently. But he sees how to turn something that would seem to us like a mistake, like a diversion, into good. For Christians, I think with two examples that are the kind of traditional Christian examples of that would be one of the fall of man, that in some ways that was a diversion, but it was ultimately for God's good and purpose that happened. And then the atonement, the death of Jesus Christ, as well as a similar situation. It was something that was tragic in many respects, but also something that he used to further his plan ultimately. So he's able to use at what happens in the world in a way to work towards his purpose at the same, without ever compromising choice, without ever taking away our ability to act freely. He's able to use that for his good, in a way that is, I think, beyond our ability to see the consequences of actions.
Okay, I'm not clear on how this is, that these are actually consistent. Like, let's say that, I think that I have the choice to, when I have a choice, I don't know, I can just use my hand here. I can move my thumb or my index finger,
Yeah.
just to take a kind of silly.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm determining which of those, assuming those are my only two, in the moment. It's
sure.
And so if I'm really determining it in the moment, which of those I'm going to do, how can it be known in advance if it's a free choice?
Yeah.
I mean, I can see how you could, like, we can predict there's going to be an eclipse thousands of years in advance, but we also don't think those are free, that it could have gone differently. So
yeah,
I guess if you know in advance, as God does, what's going to happen, then isn't it true that we can't really be determining in the moment what we're going to do? Because if it were really up for grabs what we're going to do in a given moment, then it seems like God could not.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think that one response would be that God doesn't operate in the same timeline that we do. So he is beyond time. He can simultaneously see the present and the future at the same moment, in a way that we can't. But he doesn't control what happens in either of those moments necessarily. He's not controlling what finger you choose, but he is able to see what choices you've made at the same time that you're making them. I think it would be the traditional understanding of that would be that God doesn't operate in the same timeline that we do necessarily. He does see these things beyond us, but I don't know. I mean, I think it's an interesting question ultimately, but part of it is, if what you're doing doesn't ultimately make a difference, that the outcome is going to be the same in time, in a long enough timeline, a long enough projection of time, that also is part of the answer, presumably, where if the decision you make, at the end of the day, whatever decision you make, the ultimate outcome is going to be somewhat similar, then it doesn't, that's another, I think, a piece of the answer is that God is able to use whatever finger you use for the ultimate result, which is to help us. That process may take longer or shorter. It might be different depending on what we do, but the end result will likely be the same in God's time and in eternal timeline, eternal perspective that we might have. The end result is ultimately the same, whatever interstitial choices one makes, which are freely made, but it doesn't matter because the end result ultimately is consistent. I think that's the other piece of it is, one, God is likely not seeing time the same way we do, and two, he is able to direct whatever happens towards his plan ultimately. So I don't know if that either of those make sense, but that seems like the both of those are parts of the responses that to that question of free will.
Yeah, I've heard this sort of response that God, the way he relates to time is different than the way we do.
Yeah.
But I mean, can we really make sense of that?
It's hard to
I mean, is that
understand.
just,
Yeah.
if you can always retreat into mysticism and just say, well, this is how I account for that. We just can't understand it.
That's true. I mean, the analogy I've thought about, and I don't know how good of an analogy this is. This is one I haven't thought about in a while, but would be that if we're simultaneously, let's say we have a movie on film that we're watching, we could fast forward, we can rewind, we could simultaneously watch on two different screens, two different parts of the movie as they're happening, but we're not controlling what happens in the movie. Obviously, the movie's deterministic in a way that life is not. So that would be the difference, is that there really would be choices that actually change the outcome that's happening, and that's the part that we can't envision. But it's somewhat similar to, at the same time, seeing the present, seeing the future, but without actually being controlling the choices that the characters are making. I think that analogy is limited, but it does some work, I think, for that idea that we're not ultimately, he's not controlling us, even if he could see what the outcomes are going to be. He could see the potential consequences of our actions.
Yeah, that's what I don't get. And I think that the movie analogy it doesn't quite help here, because it's, as you said, it's all deterministic.
Yeah, right. There's no world where the movie ends different ways every time and it changes. So I agree. It's a limited analogy. I think I still find it a helpful analogy, but a limited one.
Well, I don't know that it's helpful on the key point,
Yeah.
which is whether we can act freely. Anyways, so yeah, where to go from here?
I mean, I'm interested in one thing I would love to hear. One thing I've always wanted to ask objectivists in the context of talking about faith and selfishness and kind of and purpose. Maybe I can hear your thoughts on a question I've been interested in. If you're
Sure.
you're happy to talk about that. So one thing that as someone who's kind of Christian or higher, there's really a belief that the purpose is to. The purpose of life in part is to become to help other people ultimately. The purpose, the way we become who we're meant to be is through selflessness, becoming less focused on ourselves and more focused on helping others and more focused on blessing and sharing things with others. And I've always been interested in the idea, the kind of pushback on that from objectivism. And I'm interested in your reaction to that, your thoughts on that. It seems to me that, I mean, my take of it is God is perfect, and because he is sharing and loving, and that's his nature, is to want to, whatever he has, to not want to keep it to himself, but to want to share everything that he has with other people, because he has such love and selflessness and empathy is part of his nature. And so I'm just interested in, I guess, your reaction to that and how that fits into your understanding of selfishness and what it means to be, what that would mean for morality. I'm just really interested in your thoughts on that.
On the view that God is empathetic and
Well, on the kind of how selfishness fits into this idea that, you know, part of what makes us happy ultimately, or makes us perfected or good, is this kind of radical empathy, radical caring, radical sharing. Of, like, I don't know if that makes sense, but it just curious about what thoughts you have on that.
well, selfishness, as Rand understands it, is consistent with caring about other people, having
Mm.
empathy for other people. Other people are actually a source of tremendous value, at least potentially, in one's own life. It can be great to have friends, a romantic partner, and you're missing out on a lot of what makes life enjoyable if you don't have those things. So there's no reason at all to shun relationships with other people, and there's actually much reason to embrace having relationships with other people. It's a very selfish, in her sense of the term, thing to do, to cultivate relationships with other people, because if what your goal in life is to achieve happiness for yourself, and on her view, that is the purpose of life, or is properly the purpose of an individual's life, is to achieve happiness. Well, one of the greatest sources of happiness is to have good relationships with other people. So she's all for that. And I mean, if you read her novels, I think you said before we started recording here, you've read some of her novels. They're full of relationships between, you know, the central characters, who are portrayed, the ones portrayed admirably, at least, they have very deep relationships, meaningful relationships with each other. I don't know if that addresses what you're asking about here, but
Yeah, it does. I guess I was thinking about this idea, you know, I mean, people that I consider heroes, or people really admirable, obviously Jesus Christ being one person, but even people that sacrifice their lives for other people. Someone like, you know, a Schindler, who risked his life to save other people. Ultimately, to me, that's the kind of a higher aspiration, is to give up of yourself to help other people. And I wonder what you make of someone like a Schindler, like someone who risks their lives, their life, really, you know, almost certain death, faces potential certain death if they're caught doing something, faces real mortal danger in order to help someone else, and doesn't get anything necessarily out of it themselves. You know, the likeliest outcome is they get killed. What to make of that kind of moral sacrifice, or action of selflessness, and what you make of that. I'm curious. I'm interested in that.
I'm not familiar with the story of Schindler, but just as you describe it, I think it does. There are cases where
He's not a perfect example of this, but, you know, there are lots of people that, let's say in the Second World War, hid Jews in their attics, and you know, almost certainly, you know, knowing that the likelihood of being caught was astronomical, and if they were caught, they would be executed or sent to a death camp, and many of them were in fact caught and killed.
Okay, I think it makes sense to risk one's own life in certain cases. To take maybe the easiest case, a loved one, like your spouse. Let's say your spouse is drowning, and you could risk your own life to save your spouse from drowning, and that would be consistent with egoism or selfishness, as Rand thinks of it, because your life will go much better if your spouse is still around than if you don't have that person, and you might prefer to die than go on living without your spouse. And then you could come down by degrees, and maybe take someone who's not quite as central to your life as your spouse, maybe your child's, or a relative, a friend's, but then you start getting to like acquaintances, total strangers, enemies. And at a certain point, I think it doesn't make sense anymore, on an egoist view, to risk your life. So certainly not not an enemy.
Yeah.
It wouldn't make sense to risk your life for an enemy, but I think an egoist can have goodwill towards strangers, and I think now, does that mean you will risk your life for a stranger? Not necessarily, I don't think, but maybe, you know, you'll hold the door open for a stranger. If, you know, someone has their arms full trying to get through a door, you might take a few seconds just to hold the door open. That would be a nice thing to do. So depending on the nature of the relationship you have with the person, I think it's gonna vary as to what lengths you would go to help somebody out.
Yeah.
I mean, the closer it is, the more you're willing, the more you're willing to risk. Like I said, with a spouse, you might even risk your entire life. So I don't think there's not a one size fits all answer of how to relate to other people. It depends on the relationship. So hiding Jews in the attic, is that an egoistic thing to do? I'm not sure. Maybe it does depend on the chances. If you think it's like almost certainly you're gonna die yourself if you don't do this, and these aren't Jews that you even know.
Yeah, potentially strangers.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't thought this through much, so I don't want to put too much weight on this, but
yeah, of course.
Right now, off the top of my head, I don't think I would blame someone who didn't help out the Jews, and it would seem at least reasonable, if not better, to not risk your life for people you don't even know. Maybe that's an irrational thing to do, to help out people you don't even know, when you think you're most likely going to get killed as a result of it. Maybe that's just an irrational thing to do, and an egoist should definitely not do that. That's my off the top of my head answer to that. But, you know, if a lot of those people who did help the Jews, if they're very heavily influenced by altruism and the morality of self-sacrifice, then maybe that is what, at least in part, what drove them to take such risks even for strangers.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. I mean, it seems like, I mean, for me, one of the differences, you know, pre-believing in God versus now, is really that idea that everyone is a brother and sister in a way, in a spiritual sense, in a deeper sense, a cosmic sense. Maybe but to me that's something that kind of blurs the gap in a way where yes, they are strangers right now, but ultimately we are as close as a brother or sister. We have that familial relationship. Ultimately, I think that changes things for me, at least, from the kind of theistic Christian belief that we're all ultimately brothers and sisters of the same God. And I think if I take that seriously, I mean, obviously I'm not perfect at that. I would not give up my life for a stranger without good feeling or prompted or desire to do, a reason to do so. But that idea, the Jesus Christ being the example to me of someone who gave up his life for his enemies, even for every person who lived, I see that, as to me, as admirable. It's the goal is to get to the point where we see everyone as brother or sister, or that's just how I see God being towards us, is that we are all his children. We are all loved and cared for in the same way, and we don't get close to that in this life. I think we're put into relationships, families especially, because that's a circle where we can be emulate that in a smaller sphere, because we're not able to love everyone in the world the same way. We are limited in how we can love, and so I think it's directed in that way towards certain people in our path. That's just my thoughts on that, anyways. But
yeah, that's definitely a point I have a different view on. Like, I don't think it's admirable to love one's enemy. I think that's a very bad thing to do.
Yeah.
And one principle that I accept is the principle of justice, and I understand that to mean giving people what they deserve. And I think enemies don't deserve love. I think they deserve some kind of punishment, whether it's just ignoring them or being actually throwing them in jail, or there's all kinds of things. But why would it be admirable to love one's enemy?
I would say it's because if this life is not the end, if life is is something beyond that continues after we die, if there's an eternal timeline, that the people that are now our enemies have the potential to become better and to become better, become perfected, become our brothers and sisters, or be our so I think to me that it's if you have that larger timeline where people now are flawed and limited, but will eventually exceed that, will eventually become the people that they can be. That changes things to me. That's kind of what I think a theistic idea of the world impacts me is it's people are not just what they are now. I don't know if you've read any C.S. Lewis. He's a well-known Christian writer. He talks about how the people we see in front of us, they are potential gods and goddesses, and one they're being so glorious that one day we would fall and worship them if we could even see them before us. The potential in every person, and even your worst enemy has that same potential, to that same spark of divine, that same spark of God in them. That changes the world to me. Like when I have that perspective, everyone is divine potential. Everyone is a brother and sister. So that idea really changes how I see how we should treat other people. So that is the big difference, maybe. To me, Christianity or church, my beliefs as a Latter-day Saint, really change the world is I see everyone as a potential brother, sister, as a potential son of someone with that spark of divine in them, and how I treat them, I think, helps further that for them.
I agree that people have potential to change, but so long as they haven't changed, I don't see that it makes sense to love someone. Like, so if someone is my enemy, and then so long as they are my enemy, then I'm not going to love that person, while recognizing that in the future they could cease to be my enemy. Maybe they could even be my friends, depending on how serious of an enemy they were to start with. I think there might be some limitations on.
Yeah, of course.
But I don't see that the potential to change. Why should that make someone love someone who is right now my enemy? Why not just wait until they've done good? Actually, you could kind of hold it out as a carrot. They might be and use your hatred of them as a stick to punish them, but you might think that you're encouraging their bad side if you show them love insofar as that's even possible while they're doing bad things. You might think that you're kind of you're not holding them to a high enough bar. You're letting them get away with stuff and abuse you if you love them even when they're doing bad stuff.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, that's I think a very fair point. I think to me it's the potential for unearned love has a power that can transform people. I think that's part of the central idea, at least to me, of Christianity, which it sets it apart from a lot of other philosophies, is this idea that none of us ultimately deserve the level of love God shows us. It's unearned, it's unmerited, and God is merciful because he loves being merciful. Showing mercy is part of his nature, showing love beyond what we deserve. So that's a big part of my worldview, is that showing of mercy is powerful. It's transformative. It has power beyond what would happen if we just have a view of justice, that we're just seeking what is right and fair and just. Justice is important, but it's also tempered by mercy and beyond, even beyond what people deserve. That's, I think, a part of my Christian kind of worldview that maybe sets us apart. So it's interesting. I think it's a really interesting subject.
It seems then that Christianity could be described as being anti-justice. Because you're saying, you're giving people things they don't deserve.
Yeah, I mean, God goes beyond justice, and they're all theories about how Jesus does that, but Jesus's death satisfies the demands of justice is a very Christian way of thinking about it. There's this demand of justice, but it is satisfied so that God is not contrary to justice. It's not contrary to justice to be merciful because of what Jesus did. That's kind of the idea in Christianity, is Jesus' sacrifice fulfills some demand for justice in some way, and people disagree about how exactly that happens or why it works that way. But that's kind of the idea of it, is justice is already fulfilled. Like, we don't need to worry about justice. We need to worry about love and mercy and compassion, I think, is the unique idea of Christianity. That even Judaism doesn't have that same idea. This really is a Christian idea, that the power of mercy and forgiveness, and I think to me it's a powerful one, and it's one that I find a lot of joy in trying to live my life according to those principles.
This is reminding me of the free will discussion, like how that gets reconciled with the divine foreknowledge. Here we have another thing that it seems like there's some kind of reconciliation projects that needs to happen, and it seems like there's no justice, but because there's this sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, that kind of made up for the justice. And as you were just describing it there, it sounds like so I said Christianity seems like it's anti-justice, but then you propose this way of trying to say it's really not anti-justice because there was this sacrifice of Jesus. Now can I really make sense of that? That's I have my doubts, but I don't know how much time we have left.
Yeah,
here.
I think I have to go because I have a call, a work-related call I have to make in a few minutes.
Okay. All right. Well, let's end it there then. And thank you for doing this.
Yeah, happy to talk, and happy to talk more sometime if you want to as well. But it's fun, pleasure talking to you.
Okay, great. All right. I'll catch you later then.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.